just take a couple of minutes, which will allow me in the course of that to introduce you, Kabir, and you, Simone, and put in perspective the TechSprint. Maybe we can now move to this particular TechSprint, because that has become one of the tools in the innovative regulators' armory. Tell us a bit more about the process, perhaps why the Innovation Hub chose to adopt a TechSprint type approach, and how you came to work with the Saudi G20 presidency around this one, to give us a sense of the process that you've gone through in these last rather difficult 6 months.
Sure, and you know, as you mentioned earlier, Simone was an integral part of this. So please keep me honest, Simone, as I kind of walk through the story. But essentially, it's what I describe as a long-form hackathon. It ran from May through to the end of September, or actually early October, technically. And it really was meant to showcase how modern technology can really strengthen regulatory and supervisory practices, right? So true RegTech and Suptech focus. We worked very closely with the Saudi G20 presidency, who helped kind of elevate and provide that global platform. They also provided some of the funding for the participants and the prize monies as well, which was actually important, right? Because we want to make sure that it's a big investment for the participants and it has to be worth their time. Work closely with the Financial Stability Board in terms of generating problem statements that were of interest and relevance to regulators and supervisors. The MAS was obviously a big sponsor, run this event out of Singapore, so the Monetary Authority of Singapore was also a key partner for us, as was the ASEAN Financial Innovation Network, which provided a platform, a virtual platform to really execute the event. And then last but not least was R2A, who were instrumental in and contributed significantly into making the event the success that it was. In terms of the why, I sort of alluded to it, but it's really two parts. Plain and simple, it's helped to really stimulate the supply side and help kind of mature the kind of plethora of vendor solutions out there, and also create opportunities for these, in some cases, very small startups to get direct feedback and exposure to the regulatory community and at very senior levels. And so we had a number of workshops embedded within the process, and we were able to really facilitate that kind of direct dialogue. I mean, in the kind of lean startup mode, it's all about really understanding the problem statement, really being able to pivot and adapt your solution to meet the need of your user, right? And that's really what we're trying to do, is help bring kind of the product managers and the users closer together in that sense. And then on the demand side, it's obviously to stimulate more demand amongst the regulatory community and help evolve and transform kind of their digital journey, if you will. At the end of the day, we're all on a bit of a technology transformation journey, and it's kind of opportunities like this that we think help really inform that roadmap and that strategy for the regulatory community. The details are just to set the stage. So again, I mentioned it's a 5-6 month event. In the end, we had over 128 participant proposals. The judge community were then brought together to judge these proposals, and we whittled it down to 20 sort of shortlist participants against 3 problem statements, specifically 1 dynamic information sharing amongst regulators, so certainly in the times of stress like pandemics, 2 monitoring and surveillance of crypto markets, and then lastly the automation of regulatory reporting. And so there was 6 to 8 shortlisted participant firms in each of these categories. And we've just announced the winners in early October, and so we're happy to kind of get into those details as well. But I don't know, Simone, if you had anything else you wanted to maybe highlight there that you observed as part of the process yourself. Oh, you're on mute.
Thank you, Andrew. No, I think you described the process very accurately. It was a great opportunity for R2A to somehow take some of the lessons from the work we did in the last couple of years, matching the demand that was coming from the supervisory authorities specifically in the Philippines and Mexico, with some of the vendors that were more innovative in this field. As David mentioned during the introduction, one of the challenges that we face, which we go through this journey of building the marketplace for supervisory technologies, is to give some space and support to smaller, newer, very innovative companies that are facing the challenge of working with public sector clients, which is a challenge indeed, because there are different ways to procure the work, to tender the projects, and timing for contracting and payments. So we can go deeper into these issues later. But we had created this process of how to select firms that are innovative enough, but also that are reliable so that they can actually serve a central bank. Where do we find that soft spot where a company is really bringing innovation, but it also like the capacity to scale eventually these prototypes into solutions that can serve a public sector authority and eventually public sector authorities across different geographies. And so we created with R2A a set of tools for the assessment, evaluation, and of the firms. And that's what we really brought mostly into the process with the BIS and the Saudi G20 presidency, adapting this type of judgment processes and criteria for the TechSprint. So this was a very exciting endeavor for us, and also contributing in the sense of giving a global point of view, bringing in some of the challenges that countries that are not FSB or BIS members are facing in innovating their tools. So R2A was able to do diagnostics in many countries in the last few years, from Ghana, India, Mexico, as I mentioned before, Colombia. And so we see that many of the problems that supervisory authorities face in more emerging and developing economies are the same that actually some of the supervisory authorities are facing in Europe, in the US, in Canada. But there are also some differences, and in some cases are advantages, less legacy systems or more freedom to tender. In some cases they're not, but like we were able to create this dialogue with your team and with the G20 Saudi presidency team to make sure that really the solutions could be relevant for all these markets.
Thanks, Simone. Maybe, Kabir, I can come to you on that, because you and Flourish in general have been big backers of a TechSprint type approach in different parts of the world. You've certainly supported R2A being involved in this way in the BIS TechSprint. But perhaps you can give a sense of how you see that tool being used, and what does it look like when it's successful? Because maybe that's a question we can wrestle with as a panel. How would we say this most recent TechSprint has been a successful one at this early stage, 1 month or a few weeks after its announcement of winners?
Thanks, David. And again, it's great to be here with all of you to talk about this phenomenal development. I was just thinking that if you go back to the beginnings of this in 2016, as you mentioned, David, it wouldn't have been conceivable that such an event could take place involving all of these stakeholders and all of these regulators. It seemed very much at the beginnings. And if Simone will recollect, and you would recollect, David, I think our view then was, look, the financial world is rapidly changing. I mean, in a way that it has been radically accelerated in the last 8-9 months. So we were not even where we are now, but it was rapidly changing. And our concern was that regulators were just not aware of what was going on, or they were really ill-equipped to deal with the transformation that was coming. And that has huge significance for all of us, as consumers and participants in the financial system. When it comes to our money, we want regulators to be smart. We want them to be aware of what's going on. We want them to protect us from harm. We want them to maintain stability and integrity in the system. And the system around them, if it's driven by technologies they can't put their arms around, then that becomes very difficult. And so, as Simone was just describing, the sort of original vision of R2A, and as you mentioned, David, was really to get regulators to touch and feel technology. At a fundamental level, it was, can you very quickly experience this stuff? and can you get close to it? And if you get close to it, it doesn't mean you're going to adopt it. That's not guaranteed. It doesn't mean you're suddenly going to become a tech evangelist, but it's going to make you smarter, and it's going to allow you to ask the right questions, and it's going to make you stay 1 or 2 clips ahead of the market development, so at least in sync with market developments. And I think from an investor's perspective, one of the things that excited us was this idea that Andrew was just describing, which is, it's very difficult to get even a meeting with a regulator if you are a fledgling business. It is quite something when a platform creates a bridge for you, and it's in a setup where you can really showcase your technology. I think for investors, if their businesses are able to do that, or if the businesses or sectors they are interested in investing in are able to do that, I think that makes a huge difference. And so I think the original sort of foundational building blocks of R2A it's exciting to see that they've carried out so well in the way BIS, Andrew and his team have taken this forward, and that arguably will continue to take it forward. So from my perspective, the fact that you were able to bring regulators with reasonable set of questions and concerns together with solution providers and businesses that might be able to solve them in an environment in which they can engage with each other, that is success. I think that's a big deal. Now, if it goes beyond that, as it happened in this initial period of R2A, where, as you mentioned, David, 2 central banks have actually adopted these solutions beyond our wildest dreams. We never expected that. That's awesome, right? That's the kind of stuff that we know will accelerate the industry in a significant way, because those guys can then turn around and tell the rest of the world, look, we started over here, we had no idea even what questions to ask, and look, now we're actually implementing these solutions. Let us help you, other central banks. So to me, already what has happened is arguably success. But I know that this world is accelerating very quickly, and if the R2A initial phase has been any lesson, I suspect more will come out of this.
Thanks, Kabir. Maybe we can wrestle with this as a panel a bit, while, by the way, encouraging our audience to send questions through. Please feel free to do that, and we'll do our best to address them. But this question of what makes a TechSprint successful, Kabir, you've suggested one way of thinking about it is bringing people to the table who wouldn't otherwise maybe have had an opportunity to come to the table. But Andrew, as you thought about doing this, what were the kind of indicators you set for success? Because I'm sure there are people on this call who are thinking about, do we want to do a TechSprint? Is that appropriate in our environment? Now, you do it as the BIS and you get 128 people participating. That could be one sign of success, right? Good participation. But is that sufficient success in the minds of the BIS for a TechSprint?
Great question. I think, obviously we did have some key metrics that we're happy to say that we hit. So on a superficial level, we can kind of claim victory. But really what matters here is, isn't even just transforming regulators and supervisors, but it's helping achieve really more meaningful outcomes for the industry, right? So it's making our supervisory function more efficient and effective, and actually in real time or near real time being able to monitor and improve the safety and soundness of the global system, to find those fraud events and to stop them before they happen, or to take actions in a more timely fashion. These are the real markers of success for the industry. To find risk indicators, in regulatory reporting frameworks that are, today probably stale. They're kind of stale dated, aggregated data that's coming in on a quarterly basis, to move the industry towards a more kind of automated, near real time and more flexible reporting model that would allow for risk indicators within loan portfolios to be caught and work more constructively together. So these are the things that we're ultimately would really drive our definition of success. But to do that, you got to walk before you run, and a TechSprint is just a tool in the tool belt that's allowed us to shine a light Certainly in our case, we're fortunate enough to have a global stage on which that we can help do that and play our role. We're very happy that the G20 governors meeting actually included a mention to this in their official communique. These are things that that actually do help and matter to help, again, create more momentum, more energy, more visibility on the importance of what we're trying to accomplish. From a regulatory, I used to be a CIO at a market infrastructure, and so very much familiar with what it takes to transform an organization with a long legacy, a technology legacy that's not easy, but to start to adopt cloud technologies and API service delivery and understand what the kind of 4-stage data maturity model is when you're trying to build an organization that has capabilities to handle data, to handle high volumes of data in much more sophisticated ways. And so these are very kind of long journeys that we're on, but I think this kind of thing helps, again, just shine a light on it and kind of help the community move forward.
Well, I like the fact, Andrew, that you're bringing in the sense of outcomes as being key here. It's not just the outputs, how many people you get to the table. That clearly has been successful, it seems, especially at a time of pandemic and shutdowns and so on. That's something we could talk about. How you do a virtual TechSprint is something in itself, which you had to learn very quickly in this environment. But more by its outcomes, what will it have delivered a year from now? And I think that's something we should talk about, right? What would our hope be? Because I often find I'm asked, do a TechSprint, great, it's exciting. Participants often enjoy the experience, the challenge, the collaboration, the buzz that goes with it. But where does it get you to within a year or two? So let me ask that question of, in fact, any of the panelists, but particularly thinking of this BIS TechSprint, which is, what do we hope would be the outcomes we could see a year from now, from having chosen these 3 winners in each of the categories? What do you think might be an enduring outcome as opposed to simply a competition that went well? And we do have questions coming in on the chat, which we'll be getting to in just a moment as well.
Well, maybe I can say a few words on that. And from my perspective, I think that I wouldn't have been able to say this a few years ago, but now we can be more ambitious, right, David? I think the world, things are hurtling forward in a way that were not expected before. So I would want, to go beyond the experimentation, right? That would be a successful outcome. Then a year from now, that I think one of the winners, I believe, is Tokitaki, if I'm not mistaken. And having looked at, Abhishek is phenomenal, and having looked at the team closely, that's truly path-breaking technology. I think, the banks that have used it in the Southeast Asian context have amazing things to say about it. So I would want to hear the same from the regulators a year from now, to say, look, we need this stuff. We can't live without this stuff. This is important for us, to Andrew's point. I'm reminded, I attended a meeting of the financial integrity units of different central banks many years ago. And at that time, it was the emergence of crypto and concerns around visibility around crypto and how to regulate it. And I remember the Finnish FIU standing up and mentioning a company that they were working with. It was an unknown company at that time, an unknown piece of technology, but it was, to me, that was a marker of success that I would like to see here. The regulators getting up and saying, we're using this. It's an unknown piece of tech. You guys have never heard of it. But guess what? We are able to do a better job because of it. And we have proof to show you. So my goal would be, let's get beyond experimentation. Let's see the use of these technologies. And in some cases, I think it's long overdue.
Well, I see your fellow panelists nodding there. And we can continue this thread, but let's just go for one moment to a question that's come up in the chat there. This is from Domingos Escova. And Simone, it sounds like a question that you might be in a good position to answer from an R2A perspective. So I think Kabir talked about this getting meetings, the fact that young tech providers struggle to even get meetings with regulators often, to be heard, to be acknowledged at all. And I think Domingos is asking us there, well, has that actually happened? Have we seen regulators get more open to meetings? And has there, in fact, been business done with new small regulators during the 4 years of R2A?
Thank you, David. I mean, we definitely saw a lot of interest for this type of work and solutions. We had diagnostic work done in many countries over Asia, Latin America, and Africa. And then some of this work brought actually to those solutions that Kabir was speaking to. Beside the Philippines and Mexico, which is where R2A was able to prototype and then to scale the 3 solutions, but also one of the proof of concept that we have developed for Colombia was then transformed in a solution itself. I know that the African Development Bank might be founding 5 countries in Sub-Saharan Africa to scale the type of solution that we developed in the Philippines. So there is a lot of demand for this type of work. And I think what is important is to build the capacity of both regulators and innovators to have a bespoke dialogue. Well, in our experience, and it's actually quoting one of the leaders from the public sector, Pierre Oman, a lot of what gets lost is in the transformation from the functional requirement into the tech specifications. So functional requirements is like what the supervisor really wants to get out of this solution. What do they need? And the technical specifications is, as you can understand, like the technological ingredients that are in the menu and how they're combined together to build the solutions themselves. So if we are able to build the capacity on both sides so that things don't get lost when we're translating from functional requirements to technical specifications, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of acceleration. And the other thing that is needed is definitely some new tools in terms of procurement to be able to do the experimentation that Kabir mentioned, because it's very hard without a partner like R2A for a supervisory authority to experiment in this area. If the tender is for 1 year only for projects that are multi-million, multi-years, then there is very little opportunities to work with smaller companies that have a shorter curriculum, but they're really offering some of this innovation. So, and that's what R2A has been doing for 3 years. In part, has been de-risking this engagement to make it safe for both the supervisors to work with firms that are less known and but proposing really these innovative solutions, and for the innovators themselves to be able to go through a procurement process in a timely manner, being paid in a timely manner, and have this support in the translation. I see that this is what needs to be built more and more, is these boxes for innovation within regions, within central banks. The dialogue is going on, but also it's important for the private sector to, whether they are financial service providers or Suptech providers, when they step into the meeting with the central bank, to really understand the language of the public sector, to understand what are the frameworks, the risks that the supervisor is thinking about. And when I will talk in a few minutes about the next phase for R2A, there will be more of that capacity building work to be done to offer to the vendors.
Andrew, perhaps it's a bit early to ask you. You've only just announced your winners, right, about how much interaction is really happening between central banks. But at least we could ask you, would it be legitimate to ask you in a year's time that question as a measure of outcome, the kind of measures being espoused here about moving beyond experimentation to new meetings, new connections being set up? Is that something you as the BIS would want to see and be happy to be asked in the years from now?
Yeah, I think it's a fair challenge to see if we can look back after a year and try to see if this cohort, if you will, has had some sort of success. And I think I'm very happy to see even already though the winners that we've announced, and not to take away from all 20, and in fact all the participants, but the winners, Financial Network Analytics, has already actually launched a new site and kind of really taken their solution kind of more public, and I believe they're calling it like the G20 monitor.com or something like that. And so it's really putting some wind in their sails, and I think that's fantastic. So I think, we'll have to track these companies to the extent possible, and that's obviously something that Simone and R2A are doing already, but it'd be nice to sort of come up with a measure of kind of health of these companies and see if this kind of thing has had any kind of measurable impact.
We're getting a number of questions in the chat which relate to the process. Let's see if we can tackle some of those head on. One is a question from Shamista around a virtual process, and perhaps Andrew, you or Simone, you've seen physical processes in person as well as now this virtual one, could comment on how did that work and what learnings there might be. And then we have a question from Loretta Michaels as well about, across these three problem statements, where did you see more interest in terms of applications? And does that give any guide, I guess, to where the tech world is focusing right now?
Sure, I'll just speak briefly on the process, and maybe Simone might have deeper insights on kind of some of the areas of interest. But obviously we plan to do this actually in a much more kind of traditional way when we first conceived of the event. But then quickly the pandemic descended upon us, and we did have to sort of pivot to execute this thing fully virtually. Now, honestly, it was it wasn't that big a transition. Certainly the participants are all very tech savvy companies. It's no big deal for them to operate in this way. In fact, many of them operate entirely virtually as teams. So certainly collaborating through events like webinars like this. The platform itself was very much set up for hosting all these participants. The API gateways were all there. So I think that was fairly smooth sailing, to be honest. And then the only downside, I think, is if we had been able to orchestrate a face-to-face meeting with some of these shortlisted participants and the regulators and convene in Singapore or somewhere else around the world, I think that would have really only just deepened that networking opportunity and that face-to-face communication opportunity for both sides to, again, really just maximize the value of what we're trying to do here. So that's the only thing that I think we couldn't quite replicate in a purely virtual sense.
And so, did you want to address quickly the question about what type of interest you saw shown, because you were obviously involved in the processing of some of the applications in support of BIS?
Sure. So quickly, I think I agree with Andrew. I think the virtual TechSprint works very, very well. Of course, doesn't have the magic that happens at the coffee machine doesn't happen on Zoom, where you just have the sparkle of innovation because people who share the same interests and work in the same sector start talking, and you never know where the conversation leads. But in terms of like driving the TechSprint from the beginning toward the conclusion, we didn't face any major challenge. It worked very, very well. And I want to thank really all the people involved on the BS team, on the G20 team, and the judges and the participants, because it was smooth, because everybody was really also open to work through some of the challenges of the virtual world that we are in. Now, in terms of there was a very good balance in between the application that we received across the three problem statements and the quality of the solutions that were presented as well. These are three of the major areas: the reporting, information sharing, AML supervision. So of course there are many more areas where work is needed in terms of Suptech, and one that we really highlight and focus a lot on is market conduct supervision. But I think that the quality was very well balanced in the number of applications as well as the geographical distribution. We had application for, to say, 128 teams, companies from 38 countries. So it was very representative of a global movement that is arising. Both the demand and the supply of this solution doesn't come only from Europe or from the United States, but it seems to be something that is active all over the world. And in fact, we continue seeing demand for this work. This week, we're starting with the Toronto Center capacity building for the superintendency in Peru. We see authorities also, to pick up a few questions. There are not only central banks, definitely. There are FIUs that are interested. There are authorities that are doing only supervision on the markets. There are authorities that are focused on consumer protection. So and capital markets authorities as well. So I think this need for innovation is felt across all the financial sector. And the activity that we've seen this year and the engagement of the big players such as the BIS is definitely encouraging in the sense of where Suptech is heading to.
In terms of where it's heading to, let's tackle this. So we've heard there's a lot of activity, a lot of interest, Simone, as you said, across all those categories of problems that need to be solved. What about the gender angle of Suptech? Because let's face it, we're an all-male panel sitting here. Does this reflect the face of Suptech or RegTech today, or in the people that you screened, in the panelists, Andrew, that you had, the judges, the process that you set up? What does that say about the gender balance in this world today? And is there anything that can be done or should be done to think about improving it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question, and it's a fair question. You know, the participants, just to be clear, we're not individuals but firms, right? So we had 128 firms. Certainly, I would say a majority of the leads or were male, you know, pitching the solutions. But that said, you know, certainly we did observe, and I don't have accurate stats, unfortunately, to answer this more fully. But certainly we did observe a great diversity, certainly at least regionally, you know, great diversity of firms from across the world, and certainly some gender diversity. On the judging side, in fact, though, it was 50-50. So we did recruit judges from around the world, and it was 7 male, 7 female judges. If I had to pick a side, I'd say the female judges, no offense, Simone, kind of were, you know, more vocal and perhaps a little more engaged and stronger, and which was really helpful in enlivening the debate. You know, Joanne Barefoot from the Alliance for Innovation and Regulation, Carolyn Malcolm from the OECD, Arunma Ote from University of Oxford, but a former World Bank, you know, leader. So really great name, really big kind of profiles, and great participation from the female judging cohort that we had. And then, you know, the only thing else I can really say is, you know, as an experienced technology leader, there is a gender diversity issue in the kind of, not just the fintech sector, but in the technology sector writ large. Time and time again, when I was recruiting for building out my technology teams at Payments Canada, you know, we would really try, but we would see kind of a much lower engagement rate on job applicants for technology roles. So like as low as 15 to 10% at times. And so there's sort of like a supply chain issue a little bit in the technology world, where we have to do much better at promoting STEM and technology within engineering for women. And there's some really great organizations that are out there doing that, and certainly encourage and support them, Women Who Code and things of that nature. So yeah, there's work to do for sure, but I can't speak specifically in the regulatory and supervisory you know, organizations with good, you know, statistics.
Is that something you could add to? Because the gender angle is one angle of what makes a healthy sector, this RegTech sector, which you've been a backer of from its early days. How would you think about that? And are there other aspects that would make this a healthy sector in every sense of the word, a flourishing sector into the future that, as you said, goes beyond just experimentation and playing with shiny toys, as some might easily say?
Yeah. No, I was just reflecting on the question. I mean, we are all male panel and so on, and your view, your question about the gender balance in this industry, or the gender aspects of the industry. And what came to my mind is that, you know, I've looked at a lot of RegTech companies over the last few years, and I think predominantly they are led by all-male teams. However, when we've due diligenced and looked at fintech companies, what we find is that the compliance leads are often women. And in fact, that role is the beginning of a sort of a diversity at that fintech firm. That's usually if it's an all-male team, that's the first female hire is in that capacity. It's a very critical hire, obviously. So I think like so many aspects of the technology industry, I think this industry is not spared by the gender imbalances that exist, and I think the next panel should definitely have a female voice, David. Mm-hmm. I think in terms of the industry overall, I mean, frankly, I think that if there are solutions out there increasingly being adopted by regulators, and I think if that market develops, I think you're going to find investors excited about those solutions. That's how it goes, right? I mean, there's nothing that says, look, this business is here to stay when the regulator starts using it and blessing it. And I think that's a huge signal for the market. So I would like to think that we need to kind of drum up the investor interest, but I think there are a lot of investors interested in this space. We've co-invested with them or looked at businesses together with them. And I think they see this as a fundamental part of the way the financial sector is evolving. So definitely having investors at the table is a critical part of a healthy sector. If that was one of the implications of your question, David, but I think that what could go a long way is this sort of moving beyond experimentation. It's what happened in the first phase with the regulators. I think it's actually adopting these solutions, and I think that would pull in investors into this space much more aggressively than has been the case.
So we've had a number of questions in the chat here, some of which are very specific to R2A, and no doubt, Simone, you can pick up the questions of how R2A might or might not be able to help going forward, and we'll talk about going forward in a moment. There are also, Andrew, some questions about whether you, for example, touched on CBDC, central bank currencies, which it sounds like the answer is not in this TechSprint, although in general, you mentioned that the innovation hubs are in fact doing that. So watch this space. Your last question there, your last comment, Kabir, really touches on a question I see Brian Zhang has raised, which is beyond experimentation. So how transferable are the solutions among regulators and between jurisdictions? And would a GitHub type of thing work? And Simone, let me put that to you, because it's something that R2A has explicitly spoken about and obviously explicitly thinks about. How would you respond to Brian's question?
Thank you for the good question, Brian. Yes, actually, the code of the 3 solutions that R2A developed are on GitHub. So whatever was no proprietary code, we have shared that. And it's very important that we continue sharing, whether it's from solutions that are implemented, proof of concepts, but like as much as we can bring out there, since this is such a new innovative field, it's very important that we are able to see each other ideas and to collaborate. That's why also sometimes I think there is value not only when we bring the solution to the end, but when we create a proof of concept. We created one for Colombia. The proof of concept was picked up for building on what we did in the Philippines. Colombia didn't really go to that for the proof of concept, but then Rwanda picked it up and now is developing the solution. So there is this incredible like fermenting environment, like where people are so interested in it. It's important that we share code, we share ideas, that there is a very good dialogue. Also, one quick thing about gender, I was on a panel on Friday organized by the Center for Financial Inclusion, and we were 3 panelists and 2 were colleagues from Colombia and the Philippines, and women who are leaders in this sector, who are leaders in their financial authorities. I've been traveling the world, meeting central banks and Suptech providers for the last 4 years, and where I have to recognize that the majority of the people that I met with are men, but there are incredible women leaders that are really doing great work as supervisors, as innovators, and they're there. But on the gender aspect, one different thing that I wanted to share is that One of the KPIs for the project in the Philippines is they're actually now with the chatbot and the consumer protection solution that they're implementing, they're finally able to see the gender of the people who are filing complaints. So if we go into the gender of the clients, one of the things that this technology is bringing more and more is to really to divide the different segments of the population and to understand what is the impact of on different genders, different income levels. So that's another important point, because then that intelligence can be brought into policy making. And when we talk about gender gap, it's important to understand, for example, how many women and how many men are experiencing challenges with some of financial products, and with financial products specifically, and what's the availability of recourse mechanism for them. And another thing, it's to go back and quickly finally close my answer to Brian. We published this paper a few months ago, is the data stack paper, where we really proposed not only opening code, not only opening ideas, but opening data as much as possible in the public sector. I think that's where the next frontier is to find the smart ways for the financial authorities, now that they are going to start collecting better data, more granular data, timely data with Suptech solutions, but then making them available to all the market players. So not only opening code, but really opening data in a way that is digestible, because so many of the open data portals today don't make it easy for anyone to use those data. By creating open data commons, which is what the data stack report talks about, I think it's really one of the next frontiers for our work.
David, if I can quickly add to that, I think there are, in terms of the open source and what the data commons and what Simone just mentioned, this industry, we can look at two tracks. There's that track, which is there are these startups and we are bringing them closer to regulators, and the industry is emerging through them. The other way to look at it, and I think an important complementary way to look at it, is something Andrew briefly referenced, which is developing public goods. And I think there is a whole, so there are aspects of this industry and the way this architecture is developing that public goods play a better role and might be needed. What they are and what that might look like, I think, is still unclear. Clearly data exchanges, especially on AML, for example, seem to be areas where regulators can come together and set up joint platforms. There might be other areas. So some aspects of this industry serviced by startups with cutting edge technology, some other aspects may still be serviced by startups, but under a different configuration where they're really public goods that are being set up. And I'm excited that BIS is part of this story now, because it's sort of structurally equipped to drive that agenda forward.
That's a great point, Kabir. Thank you. We're nearing the end of our time on this webinar. We're also nearing the end of this first phase of R2A's life. So what I'd like to do, Simone, is ask you to take a couple of minutes to tell everyone on the call what the next stage of its evolution looks like. And then I hope we'll have just a minute or two left to hear any final thoughts from Andrew or from Kabir that might be able to respond to some of the questions we haven't got to, and more generally on this bigger picture of how is RegTech evolving, where this TechSprint is just one tool, as you've heard, and there's a much bigger picture of evolving beyond experimentation that's going on. So R2A is evolving. Simone, what's the next step?
Thank you, David. Yes, so as on November 1st, 2020, R2A will continue its work alongside the Cambridge Center for Alternative Finance at the University of Cambridge. And R2A will become an integral part of the vast ecosystems of projects that CCAF, the CCAF, is implementing to address emerging gaps in financial sector innovation, supporting evidence-based decision-making by regulators, supervisors, policymakers, and the other stakeholders. So as R2A, we will continue to develop proof of concept and Suptech solutions for financial authorities to adopt new supervisory solutions and develop strategies as well. The Suptech strategies are so important for their digital transformation. And to produce knowledge products that continue sharing expertise and contributing to create that bespoke dialogue that I was talking about before on the future of financial supervision. There is a report on Suptech for consumer protection in collaboration with CFI that will be published in November, and more is coming. And very importantly, addressing some of these needs for capacity building, we will also design a Suptech model for the Cambridge FinTech and Regulatory Innovation online education program. It's a program dedicated to supervisors, to regulators. I think already there is a cohort of 500, 600 supervisors and regulators from all over the world. And we will add Suptech to the topics that are touched during these capacity building activities. And this is to contribute really to build the capacity for regulators and supervisors at the global scale on the topic of supervisory technology. And also something I'm very excited about, we will leverage collaboration with other parts of the University of Cambridge, and for example, with the business school, exploring new ways to support the growth of the Suptech marketplace, building the capacity of the Suptech providers, whether it is about governance, how to adapt their business to work with the public sector, and how to be able to create this innovation while keeping a business alive, working with public authorities, which presents some very specific challenges. So equipping them to effectively engage with this type of partners like the public sector agencies. So more things to come. All the good that has been done will remain there, the website, the GitHub, the publications. But what we really hope to leverage is broader ecosystem that the University of Cambridge and the Center for Alternative Finance provide R2A with. And I really want to just take 30 seconds, David, if you allow me, to thank the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and the Omidyar Network and USAID, who have been the three organizations that supported R2A since October 2016, since the beginning. Actually, the journey started with a whiteboard in February 2016. And at that time, I think in February 2016, we had not heard about Suptech. We were still talking about a big RegTech bag where all of this was part of. And back in the days, it was, as the Kabir said, we didn't know how long it would have taken for the standard setters, for the BIS, for example, to start working in this sector. And it's been incredible fast, this journey. Like, I have seen this sector growing exponentially in the last 4 years, and more will come. And I want to thank in particular Rosita Naimi, Kabir, who is with me in this panel, and Matt Omer, who played a really important role to found and create R2A. And then Matt Grasser and Aaron Kulenkampf, part of the BFA team, who have really shared this journey with me for the last 4 years. And lastly, you, David, for all your guidance with the steering committee of R2A and all your precious work that we've done together. So thank you.
Thank you, Simone. Kabir, any last words from you? You've been acknowledged and thanked. Thank you again for being so much part of the journey the last 4 years. Last words from you?
Very quickly, I'm invested in a couple of RegTech companies, Hummingbird and Alloy, and through them I see this new world that's emerging. And one part of this new world is, we like to talk about how finance is becoming part of all our digital experiences, sort of the embeddedness of fintech. It's the phrase of the month for the venture capital industry, but basically finance embedded in all our digital experiences. Compliance, relatedly, is being embedded in all aspects of finance. It's sort of the operating system of compliance is being embedded. And I think that presents huge excitement, but also challenges for regulators. And I think that we are clearly at the beginnings. I think the pandemic has accelerated all aspects of our digital lives. I feel 5 to 10 years at times. I feel it just propelled us forward. And I think it's increasingly important that regulators take this work more seriously and engage with it. I'm so excited that BIS is part of that.
Thank you, Kabir. And Andrew, maybe a final word to you with our thanks from R2A for allowing or inviting R2A to support you on the last this last TechSprint journey. Any final words as you step back and look at the development of the sector and what you're looking to?
Well, you know, we're just getting started. As I mentioned, this is literally the first project that the BIS Innovation Hub's completed in our young lifespan. And so thank you so much, David, Simone, for supporting this journey. You know, we mentioned briefly the notion of public goods and exactly what are they and how do we deliver them. And that's square in our mandate in terms of answering that challenge. Certainly big proponents of open sourcing all of our work product, and we look forward to publishing all of our materials in GitHub and other places. So, you know, I think we're here to help elevate this discussion and contribute in a meaningful way. And I think we're off to a great start. So thank you all for you know, making that a reality.
Well, thank you. And thank you to all the panelists today and all of you who've listened in. There are exchanges of emails and things going on in the chat for follow-ups that there might be after this. As you've heard, R2A continues in another form, but with all its information, all the knowledge, the learning, the know-how that's been captured available. So I would hope that if this webinar were to be repeated without an all-male panel, as we have said, in a different form in a couple of years' time, we would be able to talk about how RegTech has indeed gone beyond experimentation. It really would be around solutions that have scaled and diffused around the emerging world as much as in the developed centers of the world as well. So with thanks to all of you and the best wishes for the future of R2A as it continues on its journey. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, David, for your leadership and timely execution of the panel. Well done.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.